All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Swing State podcast. Have a really fun video for you all. Just a quick disclaimer: Adarsh is again not with us today. Hopefully, he can get back next week. But he got
He
caught
was
up with.
scared. He knew he was going to lose this argument, so he ran away.
Yeah, I'll be talking for Adarsh basically, but he got caught up with a work assignment. Don't really know why he's not prioritizing this, but that's beside the point. We think a really fun video talking about election interference. The gift that keeps on giving. We can't seem to not stop talking about election interference and the quote unquote rigged election. So, just as a little bit of background, President Trump gave a speech last Thursday, basically, with the presumption that he was going to release a bunch of new, formerly classified, now declassified documents that were going to prove extensive, election interference by foreign adversaries such as China, and that especially that the intelligence community, so the CIA, the NSA, the DIA, various intelligence agencies covered it up and were not forthright with the president or other members of his staff. So we watched the speech. I've done, quite a bit of research. And to me, this is really, one of the reasons why I think we started this podcast is because there's a lot of claims going around, but everyone feels like no one's really doing the deep dive into what these things are because this is serious and we want to make sure everyone actually has a full understanding of election interference and actually what the intelligence communities do because there's quite a discrepancy between what was claimed and what's actually going on. So have a bunch of claims that we're going to go through. Armand, I'm going to get your reactions. And yeah, let's just get started. So the first claim is basically that China conducted a massive operation of election interference. The main thing is that they actually stole 220 million US voter registration records and have basically used that to conduct campaign and misinformation across social media and various channels to influence the 2020 election. So I'm going to give you a chance to react to that, and then I'll give my formal opinion on what this means for our elections.
Yeah, I mean, China is an aggressive collector of Americans' data, and that's the real problem. Just fundamentally, they are an aggressive collector. Does that mean that they stole the election? No. I mean, countless times in Trump's speech himself, he said they stole the election, but he not once said that a single vote was cast incorrectly or flipped due to Chinese intervention, due to any foreign intervention. And I think that's something to keep in mind. China took these records and they're all fully publicly available online and accessible to anybody. You can go in and purchase them. There's different types. Some are free. Some can be up to $37,000, I think. But like for the most part, it's fully publicly available data. It's something that you and I can get. I think the problem that we have is that China gets it, and alongside other things that they have, they're getting sentiment in a way that is very, very scary. So this is something to be very cautious about. It's also something that we have to be very clear about and not use blanket statements, as I always say, and just make sure that we're understanding that, hey, China is a problem and we have to be mindful. But also, this election was not stolen. None of the elections have been stolen. And if it's publicly available data, every country has access to it, including China.
No, only 2020 was stolen. Okay, that was the only one.
Silly me.
Right?
Silly
Okay,
me.
but only
Yes.
2020. But I think it's funny because I feel like we have to be very careful, especially as conservatives, about when we say, was this rigged? And then this is the reason why is because China had voter registration records, right? I mean, you might be wondering, why are these public anyway? It's because political parties in the states and the counties use these to kind of tailor their election strategies. So like a central committee for a county might have access and then sell these to candidates who are looking to only target like Republicans or Democrats. This is the reason why they're public in the first place. And there's not a lot of cybersecurity guardrails like other databases that are maintained by the federal government. But right, we have to maintain in 2016, Russia did the same thing of not to the extent that China of grabbing millions in voter registration records, but the purpose of influencing the campaign, right? There was no coordination with the Trump campaign, but there were misinformation, right? Bots across social media. And I would never go and say that means that the 2016 election was rigged. So we
I
can't
want to
really
flag
say,
that so much, so hard. Thank you for
right? We
mentioning
can't.
that,
I
Eric.
mean, what are we saying, right? Obviously, you guys ran with it to be fair and wanted there to be a coordination with the Trump campaign, which there wasn't, according to the Mueller report. But I'm not going to say 2016 was rigged because Russian bots ran a misinformation campaign on Twitter, right? I'm not going to say it was rigged because the Russian actors hacked into the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaigns released that through WikiLeaks. Right. This is different than actual, changing vote counts, which I think when people think rigged, they mean my vote was flipped by a foreign actor. And that is not what was released by these batch of classified intelligence documents. And that still has remained to be proven. So yeah, we can't
All
just
I'm
say
gonna
like
say
misinformation means it was rigged. So
All I'm gonna say is that Trump only mentioned Russia once, and it was in a list. And it's interesting in this 27-minute speech that he only mentioned them once when they were, in theory, on his side in this foreign intervention during 2016. And he pounded hard on China for the complete opposite reason, because he knew that China was against him. And so, again, nobody is saying that what China is doing is bad and shouldn't be monitored. It's just not illegal. And it's not something that we can consider as a stolen election, because our system has worked once again, and not one single vote has been flipped.
yeah, well, to be fair, it is, I guess, illegal for them to be sold to a foreign adversary, like if this was China, Russia, or Iran. But that's really up to the states and the local governments to maintain they have more necessary guardrails in place, I guess, to prevent the sale of this information to those
I
actors,
think
whether they be
some
through
of
it,
it, right?
whether
But
right through
most
a
of
third
it was
party or
public
whatnot.
voter data. Most of it was
Sure,
public
yeah.
voter data, though, right? So, but some of it, you're right. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, we can always add in more guardrails. I think that's fine. Right. I don't think anyone's really opposed to that, but this doesn't prove a grand conspiracy that China changed votes or altered the databases themselves. All this does show is that they had the registration records and engaged in influence campaigns, which that's been happening since 2016. I'm sure it's happened prior to that before. This is kind of how they've done it. And there's an intelligence memo that says verbatim that China did not actually alter the election tangibly in any way. So again, we already knew this basically. This is nothing really as crazy as changing votes. So I think we agree here. And I would hesitate for Republicans to kind of start arguing that point because it's not true.
Agreed. I feel like we should keep a tally, right? So we've done claim one, and
Okay,
it's
claim one we agree.
false. Let's move on. Let's move to claim two.
Claim two. So this is a good one, right? About the deep state, the claim is basically that the US intelligence community hid this from the president. Now, there's a very famous memo going around, and there's a line in the memo that is being deliberately pointed out where an analyst says that information in the president's daily brief, which is, for those who are unfamiliar, the intelligence community prepares a daily briefing, a memo, just a bunch of intelligence, analyses for the president about what's going on in various countries. This is issued daily, and it's pretty relevant. It keeps the president up to date. So this analyst basically says that the president's daily brief in question was massaged to avoid China from being linked to the 2020 election directly. People are getting upset about the word massaged because that implies that there was a certain bias into shifting the narrative in a certain way that might be counteractive to the truth. Now, I am of the opinion of I don't think this is enough to uncover a grand conspiracy that the intelligence community is undermining the fact of how relevant China's election interferences are. In my opinion, it's more of this is typical of how analysts interact with each other. And you don't want to conflate ongoing interference with a targeted assessment of they're actually rigging the election, which is kind of what it gets down to. So obviously I can see how people might, who are unfamiliar with how the intelligence community work together might think that massaging is deliberately undermining the executive branch, but to me, it's not enough at the moment to really prove anything more than that. So I think we might agree again on this one. If I could
Ding
be
ding
so
ding ding
bold,
ding. Ding
I mean,
ding 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 ding. I mean, yeah, I fundamentally this cover up is just not factual at all. I think the intelligence community, like you said, have disagreements all the time. It was specifically told to Trump still. It was said in the memo. So he does have information about it. Also, the current CIA director, John Ratcliffe, then director of national intelligence, now CIA director, personally signed off on this. So not only do you have the memo going to Trump, there's also sign off personally by the highest leader of that department that Trump put into office, and Trump still continues to keep in office in a different position, which showcases his loyalty to Trump, which showcases his alignment and Trump's alignment to Ratcliffe as well. And so for me, this is a moot point. I think that it's just another reason or another way to kind of shift the narrative, especially after what happened with the Road to Housing Act that we talked about last week, and his focus on the Save act, and it's just another kind of momentum of fake momentum that he's trying to create. And this is just one angle that he's doing that again.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you've had control of the executive branch in 2016. You had it up through the 2020 election. Now you have it again. Like, you need to be confident in the people that you appoint as your DNI director, your CI director. And if those people cannot institute like branch-wide protocols that you would prefer, then I mean that then you are responsible for that. And look, I'm not going to say that the CIA is like this perfect entity, because in my opinion, the CIA and the intelligence community as a whole is probably the executive departments that are the most wrought with corruption. But this is not how you get them with this one memo. If you want to get them, you get them through their expansive lists of what I would consider very, unethical and unorthodox projects, which there's an expansive list of them. But this is not the one, right? They conduct torture and operate black sites in the Middle East with very little human rights watches. This is not how you get the intelligence community. So for me, again, I agree with you. It's kind of a moot point. It doesn't really prove anything. And if you don't trust these intelligence communities, then you need to be harder on who you appoint, because those are the people responsible for their directives and department-wide policy. So again, I think we agree on this point. And yeah, also not true, in my opinion.
So claim number 2,
Yeah,
not true. Oh, Adarsh is rolling in his grave right now.
yeah, well,
Okay,
this is why
let's go to the next
Adarsh might
one.
want to react to this one on his own if he cares to. Claim 3, America's election infrastructure is vulnerable, and this includes voting machines, voter databases, the software, ballot counting systems, election management systems, because they are vulnerable to cyber attacks by foreign adversaries. This I agree with. I think this is valid. This is pretty universal, right? There are a bunch of think tanks, bipartisan election reform centers that agree that the more electronic you make something, obviously it's more susceptible to vulnerabilities. Does this prove that they were exploited in the 2020 election? No, but that's besides the point. I think if we want to push election reform, which I'm all for, I think this is good. This is where, I maintain the conservative talking point that we need election reform. You don't do that through saying that the 2020 election was rigged out. And this to me is the problem, because it undermines actual policy reform, because people are not going to take this point seriously, and they're going to say, okay, we're not even going to listen to what your reforms are. So I agree with this point, but I don't think that any of the intelligence memos or reports prove that this happened in 2020. Let me know
I
if you
think
agree
you
with
you
that.
said I think you said it correctly, right? When you put this sentence that like America's election infrastructure is vulnerable just out in the open, 100% separately, very, very factual. When you put it into a primetime speech about the importance for not allowing for any more rigged elections to happen again, you completely undermine something that actually has potential value and potential bipartisan support, in fact, and make it a full conservative talking point that is only going to hurt you in the long run. You're not going to get the votes you need to actually make election reform if you keep putting this inside of these drastic different talking points. And I mean, I don't disagree. I think that America's election infrastructure is vulnerable. That doesn't mean that any problematic actions have occurred yet. The system has worked so far. There has not been a single incorrect ballot
Mhm.
put through, and so I want to stress that because it is working. The system is working. It can be better. There's
Yeah.
things that we can do to be better, but it's working today, and nobody can say it's not. And so, and our president, our wonderful president, is in fact saying it's not. And so, I think that's the conversation that we have in front of us today.
Yeah, but I mean, his messaging might be a little off, but it remains to be seen that we do need election reform. But I want to emphasize for people, it would be very hard to actually change the official vote, like officially, because, even though we paper mark or we mark these on paper, when you go to vote, you have your ballot and you mark it out with a pen. You could use a ballot marking assistance device, but you vet your paper ballot after it's marked by this device. So you can't really hack that. Or if you did, you would just hopefully vet it if you care about your vote. And the other thing is, if you do hack the, election management software and the tabulation software, yes, this would cause absolute disorder on election night. And I'm all for enhancing security for that. I think that's good. But that wouldn't mean that the actual result of the election is changed. You're not going to get a different member of Congress over someone else who was duly elected because the tabulation machine was hacked, because you have a paper trail. You do the audit, you do the recount, you do the hand counting, and it's going to show what the correct result is. So it is very, very hard to actually, in the current system, change the official vote count because we still use paper ballots in the majority of the counties, unless there's extreme circumstances that are already covered by federal and state law. So
They all
this,
take weeks.
so
And
yeah,
they
exactly.
all take weeks.
Well, I think, to your point, if we wanted more hand counting, right, which is completely legitimate, there is no possibility of a hack for a paper ballot. The hand counting would take weeks. And we've criticized California in the past for taking weeks to count these votes. So I'm not willing to give that trade off of full hand counting for every single election because that would just be disastrous for the actual administration because people are going to be like, this is taking way too long. So it's a trade off, and it's a trade off I'm willing to take because you can't actually flip the results because we use paper ballots and audits and recounts. So again, I'm all for, more cybersecurity, but it's nothing in the current state that if we didn't have that, that would change the election. So again, point three, I think is a little misleading, but for the most part, I'm willing to say it's true. It is vulnerable if you remove all the rhetoric and the bluster.
Yeah, if you take out everything he said and you come out to the root cause of what he was trying to say, then we can give him this claim as accurate. But if you add in all of his extra flavors, I would say it's false, misleading at best. But again, not like it is true that the election infrastructure is vulnerable. That's fundamentally something that we need to kind of think about as American citizens and as people who are trying to keep our congressmen and women in check and something that we want to
Yeah.
continue to hopefully have our votes mean something. We should build a stronger election system. But that doesn't mean it doesn't work today. And it doesn't mean it's not accurate and great in the way that it is today.
Yep, I agree. Okay, point four is states and the federal government have ignored election irregularities and election fraud. Two main claims from this speech that are related to this point is one, it's the Muskegon in Michigan, where apparently there was an investigation starting with the state of Michigan, escalated to the FBI of a bunch of voter applications being sent in kind of erroneously. And this was flagged by the local clerk of Muskegon in Michigan, had the full investigation. Apparently, it was submitted by a consulting firm who had a quota to submit a certain amount of voter registrations. The president basically used this as a reason that there is ongoing fraud, there are instances of fraud, and we need to enhance election reform because I guess this could have changed an election result if this was scaled up to, I guess, state, county, or federal elections. My whole thing is this was caught by a clerk, which is good. That's part of your job, is to see if there's any erroneous submissions of voter registrations. It was escalated through the state. It was escalated to the FBI, and they did a full investigation. And yeah, it was
It
determined
seems
that,
like the system worked.
well,
Seems
it's
like the
apparently,
system that we've put in place worked. And I think one thing to keep in mind, outside of all jokes aside, right? This fraud was real and it was something
yes.
that needs to be looked at. And I'm glad it did. And I'm glad that the system caught it. It's also important that the purpose for which the fraud was existing was not to change the votes or to skew the votes or anything like that. It was merely because the person who was doing the fraud wanted gift cards as part of his like incentive for, hitting a certain quota. So
Yeah.
still illegal, still bad.
But we
It
already
was
knew about this
caught.
too. This wasn't even like,
And the
this was
kicker
already
is we
public.
already
Yeah,
knew
this
about this.
this
It
this
was
was
public.
public. So, if I'm in the intelligence community and I had this full scale investigation that showed this grand conspiracy, I would even take up to like a countywide seat, not like a little local. It's not even an election. It's just voter registration because they had to hit a quota. This doesn't prove anything. There is no grand conspiracy. And yeah, like I said, we already knew about it. There's no material new information. All we're seeing now is like internal deliberations between the intel community regarding this case. So again, I'm like, if you really want to push this narrative, you're going to need something stronger than this example. This to me doesn't do it. But if you're not familiar with this case and you just read the headline, it's like, yeah, wow, there was fraud. We need to be doing something about that, which we did. We did do something about it. It was caught, flagged, and investigated. So
It's
this
also
one is
important
like,
that
all right,
all of this is talking about voter registration and not actual voters voting or anything in specific to that, right? And that there's a very big distinction
right.
because
The running theme, no votes were changed.
no votes were changed.
Yep.
voter registration and the accurate number here is about 0.04% of voter registrations are not accurate voters, and none of those, and even that number is skewed because some of those include just recently naturalized citizens or like just different people, maiden name changes, etc. in that bunch. So it's not
Oh,
fully accurate.
you're talking about the non-citizen voter
Yeah,
database, right? Yeah.
yeah. And so it's just important to keep in mind that this is all in relation to the bucket of people who, in theory, could vote. It 100% does not mean actually that those people actually came out to vote. And so, two completely separate things that we have to keep in mind, especially as we start to educate ourselves about what the election system looks like in America today.
Yeah, for those again who are unfamiliar, because there's like so many nuanced details when you hear about this stuff. Like you reading the headlines, it's like it might make you think one thing, but then it's like, wait, yeah, if you dig down, it's like it's not really like that. So Secretary of Homeland Security Mark Wayne Mullen says that there are over 250,000 non-citizens on voter registrations across certain states. Now, this preliminary analysis, was only conducted with certain Republican leaning states, and the number I'm assuming was projected outward to cover what it would be in a blue state like California, New Jersey, New York, who actually didn't participate in this review. Now, it's important to understand what this review is. This review is basically, there's this database called the SAVE database, and it's maintained by the federal government, and it's for federal agencies to cross-reference citizens and non-citizens if they're eligible for federal benefits. And the thing is that this was scaled up recently by the Trump administration, where other agencies like Social Security Administration, United States Customs Immigration Services now can actually cross-reference their information with the information in the SAVE database with the hopes of seeing information of non-citizen voters that are matching up. Apparently, this was thrown out in federal court. Federal court said you can't really do this. You can't scale this up because that's not what the database is for. Nevertheless, though, there are a ton of discrepancies when you scale something like this out for intra-agency verification. If I become a natural citizen, this is not automatically updated in real time to any of these agencies. And so when you kind of use this as a projection to cross-reference, you're going to get errors. So I'm all for, looking into if there are non-citizens on voter rolls and to seeing if they are voting. I think that's important. But to kind of just like do a quick and dirty scale up of a database that's not really for this with other intra-agency barriers, you're just going to run into so many problems, and it's going to undermine the claim that you're trying to make. So again, I see that problem here. I have no issue with the purpose or the idea of cross-referencing, but the way that they're doing it and the claim that they're getting from is, you kind of got to put an asterisk by it because it's not verifiable. And that's the problem. It's this common problem of if you're not going to be good due diligence about it, it's going to undermine what you're trying to get at, which is election reform, which would be claim number 5 is we need to pass the Save America Act, which we had a whole other video about this a few weeks ago. I'm fully in support of the Save America Act. I think this is totally fine, regardless of all the claims that the administration has made. I think it's good policy. It's preventative. I don't see a problem with that. But I'm assuming you might disagree with me on this one, unless you've had a come to Jesus moment.
Just quickly on the non-citizens voting stuff, just a few kind of facts for the team. So, like you mentioned, 278,000 is the number that the DHS's claimed non-citizen registrations are, which is again, like Eric said, a scale up, an arbitrary scale up. The methodology is undisclosed of how they went from Republican areas to Democrat kind of states like California, New Jersey, Nevada, even Pennsylvania. The real SAVE database that the Trump administration owns showcases only 28,000 potential flags out of 68 million records as possible non-citizens. And even of those 28,000 records, there are examples of recently naturalized, maiden name changes, things like that are also kind of incorporated into that. And just a few other stats, fewer than 100 non-citizens have been convicted of illegally voting or registering since 1982 per the Heritage Foundation's own database. And one non-citizen registration and 0 non-citizen votes were found in Utah after 2 million plus voters were reviewed. And so it again showcases that in the current process today, voters are actual citizens and they are validly able to vote currently. The ballots that get cast today in these elections are accurate ballots that should be cast in this country. In fact, it is less than how many people should be coming out to vote. In fact, we should be increasing our ability to get more people out to vote so that we can get more people to have a say in all of the different public offices. And that leads me to the SAVE Act. I think that the SAVE Act, in theory, is about election reform, which 100% I would love to do election reform. I think
Wow.
this specific act is not the way to do it. There are 36 states with voter ID laws in existence, and none of them are as strict as the voter ID laws that are getting requested in the SAVE Act. And I think that showcases right away how strict these laws are and how it will disenfranchise 21 million plus eligible citizens. And those are the citizens who are ready to vote, who have voted in the past. It doesn't even count the people who have never voted, who we want to get out to vote, who we should be trying to find ways to make it easier to vote. And again, we don't need to go into the nitty gritty on this. I think we know, everybody knows kind of the differences in opinion here. But this campaign that Trump kind of created with these 5 claims, and right after the Road to Housing Security Act, and the way that he did this on prime time, the way that he's done this only a few months before the Republicans are about to try to hold down the fort in the midterm elections, right? It's very interesting. And it's something that you have to think about from a rhetoric perspective and from a strategic perspective to create a sense of disbelief and distrust in the system and what that could possibly mean coming down the chain. And that's why in the age of TikTok and in the age of AI and in the age of all of this, it's important for us to really sit down and learn about the facts. And the facts fundamentally are all 5 claims
Well,
wrong.
I don't know about all 5. I don't know about all 5. Maybe 3. I mean, yeah, if you guys are interested, we did a full debate on the SAVE Act. It was pretty charged. I'm not going to address where I disagree with you, except the fact that it's preventative, and I think that's fine for public policy. But yes, the president does want the SAVE Act passed. This has been a huge flashpoint in his administration. The whole reason why he didn't even sign that housing law that we discussed last week. So he definitely cares about it. I think it's good policy. But there are not enough votes in the Senate to overcome the filibuster, which is, I mean, I don't care, just make them filibuster then. Let's see where the votes stand. But either way, though, yeah, that is basically kind of what the general themes are of the president's speech last Thursday. Before we sign off, I'll just say this, that, I feel like if some people think that I'm, not being like supportive enough of this, one facet of the administration, we have the same goals, and it's election reform at the end of the day. It's passing the SAVE Act. And to me, it's, limiting, universal mail-in voting. I think that's important. And, limiting ballot harvesting, a bunch of the very liberal policies that states like California have passed. However, more of the problem is that we continue to rely on trotted out arguments without any proof, or we misrepresent what's actually going on. That to me is a problem because it undermines our goal. It undermines the ability of Republicans to push this policy through and to get people on our side to push their representatives to pass this. I think if we continue to rely on certain claims that have fallen out of favor or cannot stand up to scrutiny at all, right? It's not even just this, it's the entire whole facet of the 2020 election. I think none of it can stand up to scrutiny. And so why are we still harping on this? I think it's bad for the messaging that we need to do for voters, and that's what I'm trying to, counter. Because I at the end of the day, I want the same things, but the way we're going about it, in my opinion, is incorrect. So that was good. I think that was good. Do you disagree with that at all? You want
I mean,
election
I
reform
disagree
too?
with a few things, but no. I mean, we can fundamentally agree that the way we're going about it is wrong, and election reform is real and is needed. And those 2 statements can be said, and those 2 statements can be true. The way that we go about how we achieve them is also going to be different, and that's just where our personal, beliefs differ. But I think without Adarsh on the call, we can at least agree that the way that the president decided to go about it on Thursday was probably not the most accurate to get the goal that he sees
No,
is
Darsh
the
probably
end goal.
thinks that the votes were flipped.
Well, yeah,
Probably
he probably, yeah,
that's the whole rigged part, right?
yeah.
So
I guess the
yeah,
commenters should go out and ask for Darsh's personal opinion. Maybe he can provide some
yeah.
commentary.
I think that would help. But I mean, if people do believe that, there's legitimately no proof of that happening, and it would be very, very hard for that to happen as it is in how we conduct elections. So with that, hopefully that'll be the last time we talk about this for a few weeks, because I feel like all the news is just talked about election interference, election rigging. I'm like, we gotta talk about something else. There's a lot of other problems in this country that we need to be addressing. So one can dream, right? All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for watching. We appreciate it, and we'll be back next week, hopefully with a Darsh. So yeah, thank you all, and have a good night.